3 years. That is exactly how long Alpha Silas Blackwood had hunted the woman who shattered his soul. He didn't want to bring her home. He wanted revenge. He wanted to know why she ran and why the love of his life had turned into his greatest traitor. But when he finally tracked her scent through a deadly blizzard in the pulse of the Colorado Rockies, revenge was the last thing on his mind. Because he didn't find a traitor. He found a tragedy. He found his missing Luna frozen in the snow, her body acting as a human shield for 12 shivering, whimpering pups that shouldn't exist. And the Alpha King was about to learn that everything he thought he knew was a lie. The wind on Mount Rainier wasn't just cold, it was aggressive. It tore through the heavy fur of the wolves patrolling the ridge, carrying shards of ice that felt like broken glass. Silas Blackwood, the Alpha King of the Obsidian Coast Pack, didn't feel the cold. He only felt the burning rage that had fueled him for 730 days. He shifted back into his human form, ignoring the freezing temperature, his naked skin steaming in the frigid air. He grabbed the thermal cloak his Gamma Liam threw at him. "The scent ends here, Alpha," Liam shouted over the roar of the wind, his voice strained. "The storm has buried the trail. If she's out here, she's dead. No rogue survives a night like this without shelter." Silas tightened his jaw. "Jo is not a rogue. She was a Luna. She knows how to survive." Was. The word tasted like bile. Jo Vance. The woman who had been his fated mate. The woman who 2 years ago vanished on the night of their mating ceremony, leaving behind nothing but a note claiming she never loved him, and a scent trail that led straight to the territory of his rival the Red River Pack. Everyone said she had run off with a lover. His advisor Marcus had even produced photos of her meeting a Red River wolf. Silas had hardened his heart, turning the pack into a war machine. But he never stopped tracking her. Not to save her. To ask her why. "Silas," Liam's voice cracked. He was pointing toward a jagged crevice in the rock face, a small cave entrance almost entirely sealed by a snowdrift. I heard a whimper. Silas didn't wait. He tore at the snow with his bare hands, his alpha strength allowing him to move boulders of ice that would crush a normal man. The scent hit him then. It wasn't the scent of betrayal. It was the scent of vanilla rain and blood. He broke through the barrier and crawled into the gloom of the cave. It was freezing inside, but the wind was cut off. Silas pulled a flare from his tactical belt and cracked it. The red light hissed, illuminating the small cavern. His heart stopped. In the corner, huddled against the damp stone wall, was a pile of rags. No, not rags. It was a person. Jo. He breathed the name, scraping his throat. She was pale, her skin almost translucent, her lips a terrifying shade of blue. Her clothes were shredded, wrapped tightly around her midsection. She looked skeletal, as if she hadn't eaten a full meal in months. But it was what she was doing that froze Silas in place. She wasn't curled up to save herself. Her arms were spread wide, creating a canopy over her lap. Beneath her, tucked into the warmth of her stomach and chest, was a writhing mass of fur. Silas stepped closer, the flare trembling in his hand. 1 pup, 2, 5, 10, 12. There were 12 wolf pups, barely weeks old, piled on top of her and each other. They were whining softly, burrowing into her freezing flesh for warmth. Jo had given them everything: her coat, her body heat, her energy. She was essentially a corpse, keeping them alive. "Liam!" Silas roared, the sound shaking the icicles from the cave roof. "Get the medics, now!" He dropped to his knees. He didn't care about the past. He didn't care about the rumors. He reached out and touched her cheek. It was like touching marble. "Joe," he commanded, using his alpha tone, pushing power into her. "Open your eyes." Her eyelids fluttered. It was a miracle she was conscious. Her honey-brown eyes, once full of fire, were dull and glassy. She focused on him, but there was no recognition, only fear. "No," she whispered, her voice a crackling wheeze. Her hands tightened over the pups, shielding them from him. "Don't take them. They're not broken." "I'm not going to hurt them," Silas said, stripping off his thermal cloak and wrapping it around her and the pile of puppies. "I've got you. Not mine." She slurred, her head lolling back against the stone. "But I promised. 12. I promised. Keep them safe." Her eyes rolled back and her head slumped forward. "Joe." Silas scooped her up. The puppies tumbled and yipped, protesting the loss of their heat source. They were a mix of colors, gray, black, rusty red. They didn't look like siblings. They looked like a motley crew of unwanted runts. Liam scrambled into the cave, a medical bag in hand. He stopped dead, staring at the mass of pups. "Alpha. Whose are those, are they? Yours?" Silas looked at the woman he had hated for 2 years now, limp in his arms, half dead from sacrificing herself for a dozen strange wolves. "I don't know," Silas growled, pulling 3 of the shivering pups into his own jacket, while Liam grabbed the others. "But if she dies before I get answers, I will burn this mountain to the ground." The convoy of black SUVs sped down the mountain pass, slipping on the black ice. But Silas didn't tell the driver to slow down. In the back seat of the lead vehicle, he held Joe against his chest, pumping his own body heat into her. She was in a hypothermic coma. Dr. Emily Thorne, the pack's head physician, was in the seat opposite him, working frantically. She had an IV line running into Joe's arm, pumping warmed fluids. "Her heart rate is barely 40 alpha," Emily said, her voice tight. "She has severe frostbite on her fingers and toes. But what worries me more is the malnutrition. She hasn't been eating. Her body has been cannibalizing its own muscle to produce milk." Silas looked down at the puppies. They were packed into a heated crate next to Emily. They were sleeping now, exhausted. "Milk?" Silas asked, his voice dangerous. "She was nursing them." "Trying to," Emily nodded, checking a monitor. "But she's dry. Alpha. Biologically, it is impossible for a female wolf to have a litter of 12. And looking at these pups, they are different ages. Some are 4 weeks, some are 6. They aren't one litter." Silas felt a strange mixture of relief and confusion. They aren't hers. "Then why?" Silas whispered, brushing a matted lock of hair from Joe's forehead. "Why die for them?" When they arrived at the Blackwood estate, the pack was already buzzing. Rumors flew faster than the wind. "The traitor Luna is back. She brought bastards with her." Silas ignored them all. He carried Joe directly to the master suite, his room locking the door against his advisors. He placed the crate of puppies at the foot of the bed near the fireplace. For 3 days, she didn't wake up. Silas didn't sleep. He sat by the bed watching the rise and fall of her chest. He watched the puppies too. Now that they were warm and bottle-fed by nurses who were terrified of the alpha's glare, their personalities were coming out. They were strange. One had a crooked leg. Another was blind in one eye. One was entirely too small, a runt of runts. It clicked. These weren't just random puppies. They were rejects. In traditional cruel packs, wolves born with defects were often culled or abandoned. Jo hadn't been raising a family. She had been running an orphanage, a sanctuary for the unwanted. On the fourth morning, the door banged open. It was Marcus Silas's uncle and chief advisor, the man who had shown Silas the photos of Jo's betrayal years ago. "This is madness, Silas," Marcus spat, pacing the room. "The pack is restless. You have the traitor in your bed, and you are harboring 12 unauthorized mouths to feed. These things," he gestured to the puppies, "are defective. They weaken the gene pool. Custom dictates they be removed." At the sound of Marcus's booming voice, the puppies began to whine. Suddenly, the figure in the bed gasped. Jo shot up, eyes wide, panic radiating off her in waves. She didn't look at Silas. She looked straight at Marcus. "No," she screamed, her voice raspy and broken. She scrambled backward, falling off the bed and crawling toward the crate of puppies. She put her body between Marcus and the pups, baring her teeth. But she didn't shift. She couldn't. She was too weak. She just growled a human sound of pure desperation. "Get away from them!" she shrieked. "You won't finish the job. I won't let you." Silas stood up, his massive frame blocking Marcus. He looked at Jo. She wasn't looking at Marcus with the eyes of a stranger. She was looking at him with recognition. "Finish the job." Silas repeated his voice, dropping an octave. He turned slowly to his uncle. "Marcus, what is she talking about?" Marcus's heartbeat spiked. Silas could hear it, a flutter of fear. "She's delirious, Alpha." Marcus sneered, though he took a step back. "She's been living in the wild. She's gone feral." Jo grabbed Silas's ankle. Her grip was weak, trembling. "He knows," she sobbed, looking up at Silas, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. "Silas, please. I didn't run away. I didn't cheat. He told me you ordered it." The room went deathly silent. "Ordered what?" Silas asked, his blood turning to ice. "The culling," Jo whispered, collapsing against the crate. "He brought me the order with your signature, the order to kill the runts of the Red River Alliance. He said if I didn't leave and take them, you would kill them all, and then you would kill me." Silas looked at Marcus. The older wolf was backing toward the door, his hand reaching for the knife at his belt. "You told her I was a child killer," Silas asked, the betrayal hitting him harder than the blizzard. "You drove my mate into the mountains to save puppies you wanted dead. They are abominations," Marcus roared, abandoning the ruse. "Weakness acts like a cancer, Silas. I was protecting the pack's integrity. I did what you were too soft to do." "No," Silas said, his eyes glowing a violent crimson. "You committed treason." Marcus lunged not at Silas but at Jo. If he could kill the witness, he might have a chance, but he never made it. Silas moved with a speed that blurred the air. He caught Marcus by the throat, mid-air, and slammed him into the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. "Take him to the dungeons," Silas commanded as the guards rushed in. "If he dies before I get down there, I will hold every single one of you responsible." As they dragged the screaming advisor away, Silas turned back to the woman on the floor. Jo was curled around the crate again, checking each puppy, counting them. 1, 2, 12. She looked up at him, flinching as he reached out. She expected a strike. She expected cruelty. That was the man Marcus had painted for her for 2 years. Silas slowly dropped to his knees. He didn't touch her. He just bowed his head, exposing his neck, the ultimate sign of submission and trust from an alpha. "I didn't know," he choked out. "Joe, I swear on my life I didn't know." Joe stared at him, her hand resting on the head of the blind puppy. The tension in her shoulders slowly, agonizingly began to release. "They need milk," she whispered, her voice devoid of anger, only exhaustion. "Silas, they're hungry." The recovery room smelled of antiseptic and lavender, a scent Dr. Emily Thorne insisted helped with trauma. But to Silas the room smelled only of his own fear and the milky scent of the 12 puppies occupying a playpen in the corner. It had been a week. Joe was physically healing. The frostbite was retreating, and her ribs were mending, thanks to the accelerated healing of a werewolf, though hers was slow due to years of starvation. But mentally, she was a fortress with the drawbridge raised. Silas sat in the armchair, a bottle of formula in his hand. Nestled in the crook of his arm was Barnaby, the pup with the crooked leg. The little wolf sucked greedily at the bottle, his tiny paws kneading Silas's bicep. "You're going to spoil him," a voice rasped from the bed. Silas looked up. Joe was awake watching him. Her eyes were less glassy today, but the shadows underneath them were deep bruises of exhaustion. "He eats the slowest," Silas said defensively, not putting the pup down. "If I put him in with the others, the one with the notch in his ear, Bandit steals his food." Joe cracked a small, painful smile. "Bandit? You named them." "I needed to call them something other than, 'Hey you,' when they chewed on my boots." Silas stood up, carefully placing Barnaby back into the pen, where the other 11 were sleeping in a chaotic pile of fur. He walked to the side of the bed. The air between them was thick with 2 years of silence accusations and heartbreak. "Joe," Silas started, his voice low. "Marcus is in the containment cells. He hasn't spoken yet. But I need you to tell me, how did you survive out there? The Red River territory is hostile. The mountains are a death trap." Joe looked at the ceiling. "I didn't go to Red River. I went to the Deadlands." Silas froze. The Deadlands were a strip of unclaimed territory, a radioactive, barren dumping ground between packlands. Nothing lived there. "There's an old bunker," she whispered. "I found it. I scavenged. And people knew." "Who knew?" "The mothers," Joe said, tears welling in her eyes. "Wolves from Red River, from Obsidian, and even from the southern packs. They knew there was a crazy woman in the hills who wouldn't kill the broken ones. When they had a runt or a pup with a defect that the pack laws say must be culled, they brought them to the edge of the woods. They left them for me." Silas felt his heart shatter. While he sat on his throne, brooding and plotting war, his mate was living in a radioactive wasteland, running an underground railroad for unwanted children. "I tried to save them all," she choked out. "But the winter, it was too hard. These 12, they were the last batch. I knew I couldn't keep them warm in the bunker anymore. The heating unit failed. That's why I moved to the cave. I was trying to get them closer to your border, hoping you might find them, even if you killed me." "I would never." Silas began, reaching for her hand. She flinched, pulling her hand away. "You didn't know. I believe you now." But Silas, Marcus wasn't just cleaning the gene pool. It wasn't just about purity. She struggled to sit up, her eyes wide, with a sudden frantic realization. She began counting the pups in the pen. Her eyes darted back and forth. 1, 2, 3, 10, 12. She stopped. She counted again. 12. Her breathing hitched. "Silas, where is the 13th? Silas frowned. "There were only 12 in the cave, Joe. I carried them all out myself." Liam swept the area. "No." She screamed the monitor by her bed, beeping rapidly. "There were 13. I had 13. I wrapped him in my own scarf." He was at the bottom of the pile because he was the warmest. Silas grabbed her shoulders gently to steady her. "Joe, listen to me. There were only 12. If there was another, Marcus," she hissed, her face draining of blood. "He found us before you did." "What, in the storm?" she cried, grabbing Silas's shirt. "About an hour before you came. I heard crunching snow. I thought it was a bear. I blacked out for a moment from the cold. When I woke up, I heard a vehicle driving away. I thought I hallucinated it. But if the 13th is gone—" "Silas, he took him." "Why would he take one and leave the others to freeze?" Silas asked, his tactical mind racing. "Why that specific pup?" Joe looked him dead in the eye. "Because the 13th wasn't a runt, Silas. He was perfect. He was a golden wolf." The room went silent. A golden wolf. They were myths, genetic anomalies that happened once every 500 years. Legends said a golden wolf possessed the power to unite all packs or destroy them. They were stronger, faster, and could command other wolves by voice alone, regardless of rank. A golden wolf. Silas repeated the horror sinking in. Born to a random rogue mother. I don't know who the mother was. Joe wept. He was left in a basket near the river 3 weeks ago. He had golden fur and violet eyes. Marcus didn't want the runts dead because they were weak, Silas. He was hunting for him. He was using the culling order as a cover to search every litter in the state for the golden wolf. Silas realized the scale of the betrayal. Marcus hadn't just tried to ruin his marriage. He was trying to stage a coup. If Marcus controlled a golden wolf, he wouldn't just take over the Obsidian Coast Pack. He would rule the entire continent. "I have to go to the dungeon," Silas said, his voice dropping to a growl that vibrated in his chest. "I have to make him talk." "Wait," Joe said. She reached into her hospital gown and pulled out a small, dirty object hanging on a string around her neck. It was a dog tag. "The golden pup. I named him Orion, and I put this on him. It has a tracker inside. Old tech short range, but if he's on the estate..." Silas took the tag. It was a decoy. "You put the tracker on the tag, but kept the tag." "No." She shook her head. "I had 2 tags. I put one on Orion. This is the receiver." She pressed a small button on the side of the metal rectangle. It beeped. Once. Weakly. Beep. Silas looked at the device. Then he looked at the floor. "He's not far," Silas whispered. "He's here." The great hall of the Blackwood estate was built for intimidation. High stone ceilings, banners of black and silver, and the obsidian throne, a chair carved from the darker volcanic rock of the coast. Silas sat on the throne. He wore his formal Alpha regalia, a black military-style tunic with silver threading. But his expression was what terrified the gathered crowd. It was a look of absolute cold fury. The entire pack had gathered. Hundreds of wolves stood in silence. In the center of the room, chained to a heavy iron grate in the floor, knelt Marcus. Marcus looked battered. His lip was split, and one eye was swollen shut from resisting arrest. But he held his head high. He was an elder. He had supporters in the crowd, traditionalists who believed Silas was too soft, too progressive. "Marcus Blackwood," Silas's voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the hall. "You stand accused of high treason, of forgery, of the attempted murder of your Luna, and of kidnapping." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Attempted murder kidnapping. I did what was necessary for the strength of this pack," Marcus shouted, spitting blood onto the stone floor. "I purged the weakness. And as for that woman, she abandoned her duty. She chose runts over her king. She chose honor over your lies," Silas roared, standing up. "Proof!" shouted an elder from the front row. Elder Thomas, a staunch ally of Marcus. "Alpha, these are grave accusations. You bring a woman back who has been gone for 2 years, living like a rogue, and we are simply to believe her word over an elder who has served this family for 40 years. "Yeah," someone shouted from the back. "Where is the proof?" "Bring in the witness," Silas commanded. The heavy oak doors at the back of the hall creaked open. The crowd parted. A hush fell over the room so deep you could hear the torches crackle on the walls. Jo walked in. She wasn't wearing the hospital gown. She was dressed in the ceremonial white and silver dress of the Luna, though it hung loosely on her frail frame. She leaned heavily on a cane, and Gamaliel walked a step behind her, ready to catch her if she fell. But her head was up. Her eyes were burning gold, the color of a wolf on the edge of a shift. She walked slowly, painfully down the long aisle. The wolves she passed lowered their heads, instinct kicking in. Even in her weakened state, her lunar aura was returning, amplified by her defiance. She stopped 10 feet from Marcus. "Hello, Uncle," she said, her voice clear and steady. Marcus sneered. "Look at you. You look like a corpse. You should have died in that snow." "I survived," Jo said, turning to address the crowd. "I survived because I had something to protect, not just the 12 pups currently sleeping in the Alpha's bedroom." Gasps. Pups in the Alpha's bedroom, but the future of our kind. Jo nodded to Liam. Liam stepped forward, holding a projector remote. A massive screen descended behind the throne. "Marcus claims he was culling the weak," Jo said. "But he wasn't." The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a video. It was a digital map. A tracking signal was pulsing. A red dot. "This is a signal from a tracking collar I placed on a pup 3 days ago," Jo explained. "A pup Marcus stole from my cave while I was unconscious." "Lies!" Marcus shouted, rattling his chains. "I stole nothing." "The signal," Silas cut in his voice, deadly calm, "is coming from inside the estate." Silas pressed a button on the armrest of his throne. The floorboards beneath the dais, the raised platform where the throne sat, began to rumble. A hidden compartment, usually used for storing emergency weapons, hissed open. The crowd gasped. Inside the compartment was a soundproof glass box. And inside the box, pacing frantically, was a puppy. It wasn't a normal puppy. Its fur was the color of spun gold, shimmering under the hall lights. Its eyes were a vivid, shocking violet. Silence. Total stunned silence. "A golden wolf," Elder Thomas whispered, falling to his knees. "By the moon." "Marcus hid him right under my throne," Silas said, descending the stairs to stand next to Jo. "He planned to kill me, raise this pup in secret, and rule as regent until the boy was old enough to be his weapon." Silas turned to Marcus. "You didn't care about the pack. You wanted power." Marcus began to laugh. It was a dry, manic sound. "You fools," Marcus cackled, looking at the golden wolf pup. "You think that thing is a gift. It's a curse. The golden wolf brings war. I was going to control it so we didn't all die. The southern packs are already moving. They know he's born. They sensed the shift in the magic." Marcus looked at Silas with wild eyes. "You think you've won. You've just rung the dinner bell. Every Alpha on this continent is going to come for that boy, and they will burn this pack to ash to get him." Silas looked at Joe. She was trembling, but she stood her ground. "Let them come," Silas said, his voice ringing with alpha command. "Let them come and see what happens when they threaten the Obsidian Coast." He looked at the crowd. Marcus Blackwood is stripped of his rank. He is stripped of his name. He is to be taken to the high prison until his execution. "No!" Marcus screamed as the guards dragged him away. "You're dooming us all. The blood moon is coming. He is the sacrifice." The doors slammed shut, cutting off his screams. The hall was silent again. All eyes were on the golden puppy who had stopped pacing and was now sitting watching Joe through the glass. Silas turned to his pack. "This pup is not a weapon. He is a child, and like the 12 others my mate saved, he is under the protection of House Blackwood. Anyone who disagrees can leave now." No one moved. Then slowly, Elder Thomas bowed his head. "Long live Alpha Silas. Long live Luna Joe." The chant picked up, spreading through the room like wildfire. "Long live the Luna. Long live the Luna." Joe sagged, her strength finally failing. Silas caught her before she hit the floor, scooping her up into his arms. "You did it," he whispered into her hair. "We're not safe, Silas," she murmured, her eyes closing. "Marcus was right about one thing. The southern packs. I saw their scouts in the mountains. They're coming." Silas looked at the golden pup, then at his wife. "Then we prepare for war," he said. But as he carried her out of the hall, he didn't notice the shadow lingering in the rafters of the great hall. A figure dressed in black watching with binoculars. The figure tapped an earpiece. "Target confirmed. The Golden Wolf is secure at Blackwood Estate. Initiate Phase 2. 3 months had passed since the trial of Marcus, and the Blackwood Estate had transformed. The snow had melted, revealing the lush green valleys of the Obsidian Coast. But the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. It was a camp preparing for war. However, in the East Wing Gardens, a different kind of war was being waged. A war against expectations. "Again," Joe commanded, her voice sharp but encouraging. She stood in the center of a muddy training ring. She looked like a true Luna now. Her curves had returned. Her hair shone like polished mahogany, and the haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by a fierce determination. Around her, 12 adolescent wolves panted heavily. They were an odd bunch. Barnaby the wolf with the missing hind leg was leaning against the fence. Echo the blind female with silver fur was tilting her head, listening to the wind. Pip the runt, who was half the size of the others, was nipping at the heels of a massive hulking grey wolf named Tank, who had been born with a crooked jaw. "They're useless, Luna," a gruff voice called out from the sidelines. It was Jax, the pack's lead warrior. He was leaning against a tree, arms crossed, watching the display with disdain. "You're wasting resources, Joe. Barnaby can't run. Echo can't see. In a real battle against the Southern Alliance, there'll be slaughter." Silas, standing on the balcony overlooking the garden, gripped the railing. He started to turn, ready to go down there and reprimand Jax, but he stopped. Joe didn't flinch. She smiled, a dangerous, predatory smile. "Is that so, Jax?" Joe asked smoothly. "Why don't you bring your 3 best recruits into the ring? Let's have a spar. Capture the flag. My misfits versus your elites." Jax laughed. "I don't want to hurt your pets, Luna." "Scared?" Joe challenged. Jax growled, his pride stung. He whistled, and 3 massive prime warriors jumped the fence. They were the picture of genetic perfection, huge, muscular, and aggressive. "Go," Jax signaled. The elites charged. Their target was a red flag tied to Tank's collar. What happened next stunned Silas on the balcony. As the elites rushed forward, Echo the blind wolf barked a sharp, high-pitched signal. She couldn't see them, but her hearing was so acute she could hear their muscles contracting before they even leaped. "Left," Echo barked. Barnaby the three-legged wolf didn't run straight. He pivoted on his single back leg with torque that defied physics, spinning out of the way of an attacking elite. Because he lacked a leg, he was lighter, more aerodynamic. He used his momentum to slam his shoulder into the elite's knee, toppling the giant wolf. Meanwhile, Pip the tiny runt didn't fight. He vanished. He was so small he darted underneath the belly of the second elite, biting the sensitive, soft tissue of the stomach before scrambling away. The elite yelped, spinning around to catch a target he couldn't reach, and Tank, the wolf with the crooked jaw, just stood there. When the third elite slammed into him, Tank didn't budge. His bone density was abnormal. He was a living boulder. The elite bounced off, dazed. In less than 30 seconds, the three elites were on the ground. Barnaby was standing over Jax's lead recruit, teeth bared at his throat. Silence descended on the garden. Joe walked over to Jax, who stood with his mouth open. "They aren't broken, Jax. They're specialized. You fight with brute force. They fight with survival instincts, honed in the radioactive Deadlands. Never underestimate a survivor." Up on the balcony, Silas felt a swell of pride so strong it nearly knocked the wind out of him. He turned and walked back into his study, where a playpen sat by his desk. Inside Orion, the golden wolf was no longer a helpless puppy. At 4 months old, he was the size of a normal adult wolf. His growth was accelerating at a terrifying rate. "Did you see them, Orion?" Silas asked softly. Orion looked up. His violet eyes were intelligent, too intelligent. "They are strong, Father." A voice echoed in Silas's head. Silas froze. He looked around the room. No one was there. "Orion," Silas whispered. The golden wolf stood up and padded to the edge of the pen. "The bad men are coming soon. I can hear their thoughts in the wind. They want the key. Telepathy." The legends were true. Silas opened the pen and knelt. "What key, Orion?" Me the boy wolf projected, resting his heavy head on Silas's shoulder. "I am the key to the red door. That is why the Shadow Man is here." "What Shadow Man?" Silas asked, his blood running cold. "The one who smells like sulfur. The one who wears the guard's face." Before Silas could ask more, the door to the study opened. Jo walked in, flushed from training, looking radiant. She stopped when she saw the serious look on Silas's face. "What is it?" she asked, rushing to him. "We have a spy," Silas said, standing up. "And I think Orion just told me who it is." But before they could act, the estate siren, a bone-chilling wail that hadn't been used in 50 years, shattered the air. Boom! The ground shook violently as an explosion ripped through the west gate. "They're here," Silas said, grabbing his sword from the wall. He grabbed Jo, pulling her close for a searing, desperate kiss. "Get the misfits. Get Orion into the bunker. Do not come out until I say so." "Silas, go." The night sky was no longer black. It was a bruised purple, lit by the fires burning along the perimeter wall. The smell was horrific, burning fur ozone and the metallic tang of blood. The Southern Alliance hadn't just brought wolves. They had brought tech and magic. Alpha Kalen, the leader of the South, was known as the Butcher of the Bayous. He didn't care about honor. He had siege engines that launched canisters of concentrated wolfsbane gas. Silas stood on the ramparts of the inner keep, coughing as the green mist drifted below. He was covered in blood, mostly not his own. Beside him, Liam was firing a heavy-caliber machine gun into the wave of enemies breaching the courtyard. "There's too many of them," Liam roared over the gunfire. "They disabled the electric grid. The west wall is gone." "Where are the reinforcements from the north?" Silas shouted back, slashing a climber who tried to scale the wall. "Cut off!" Liam yelled. "Someone blew the bridge. It was an inside job, Silas." The explosives were planted on our side. The Shadow Man, Silas thought. Orion was right. "Pull back to the Great Hall," Silas commanded. "We bottleneck them there." Down in the chaos of the courtyard, the battle was brutal. But amidst the slaughter, a strange unit was turning the tide. The misfits were fighting. They moved like a single organism. Echo barked coordinates, and Tank acted as a battering ram smashing through enemy lines. Barnaby and the faster, smaller wolves acted as harassers hamstringing enemies and vanishing into the smoke before they could be caught. They were protecting the entrance to the bunker. But the enemy wasn't focused on the bunker. They were focused on the Great Hall. Suddenly a voice amplified by magic boomed across the battlefield. "Silas Blackwood!" The fighting paused. From the smoke near the ruined gates, a figure emerged. Alpha Kalen was a giant of a man wearing armor made from the bones of his enemies. He held a massive war hammer. But it was who he was dragging by the hair that made Silas's heart stop. It was Dr. Emily Thorne. "I have your physician," Kalen shouted, his voice gravelly and amused. "And she has been very helpful. She told us exactly where the golden pup is kept during the air raids. Not the bunker, but the panic room in your study." Silas went cold. He had moved Orion at the last second, thinking the bunker was too obvious. Only Emily and Liam knew. "Emily?" Silas whispered. Emily looked up, her face bloody. "I'm sorry, Alpha." She wept. "They have my sister. They said they'd kill her." "Open the gates, Silas," Kalen roared, raising his hammer over Emily's skull. "Give me the boy, and I leave your pack alive. Refuse and I kill everyone, starting with her." Silas stood on the balcony. He looked at his pack, battered and bleeding. He looked at Jo, who had just emerged from the shadows of the garden, the misfits flanking her. She looked at him, shaking her head. "No." "If you give him the boy," Jo shouted, her voice carrying over the silence, "he brings the end times. You know the prophecy, Kalen. The golden wolf is the key to the abyss." "Exactly," Kalen laughed. "I don't want to prevent the abyss, little Luna. I want to control it." He swung the hammer. "No!" Silas roared. He jumped. It was a suicidal leap 40 feet down from the balcony. Silas shifted in mid-air, transforming into his massive midnight black wolf. He landed with a bone-shattering crunch directly on top of Kalen. The impact sent the hammer skittering away. Emily scrambled to safety. Silas and Kalen tore at each other. It was a clash of titans. Kalen was larger, magically enhanced by dark shamans, but Silas was fighting with the rage of a mate protecting his family. Silas locked his jaws onto Kalen's armored shoulder, crunching through bone. Kalen howled, driving a silver dagger into Silas's flank. Silas yelped, but didn't let go. He thrashed, ripping the armor off. But then a strange sound cut through the noise of battle. A high-pitched whistle. Silas felt a sting in his neck. A dart. His vision blurred instantly. Wolfsbane. Concentrated, his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the cobblestones, shifting back into human form, naked and vulnerable. Kalen stood up, panting, blood pouring from his shoulder. He kicked Silas in the ribs, flipping him over. "Brave dog," Kalen spat. "But stupid." He looked up at the balcony where Liam and the guards were paralyzed, guns trained on him, but unable to shoot without hitting their alpha. "Stand down," Kalen ordered, "or I rip his throat out right now." The obsidian wolves lowered their weapons. "Bring me the boy," Kalen commanded. The doors to the study were kicked open. Two of Kalen's elites dragged a thrashing, golden-furred wolf out onto the balcony. They threw him over the edge. Orion landed awkwardly, whimpering. He scrambled toward Silas, licking the alpha's face, trying to wake him up. Kalen grabbed Orion by the scruff of his neck. The golden wolf snarled, his eyes glowing bright violet, but he was still a child. He was no match for a war-hardened alpha. Finally, Kalen grinned. He pulled a strange, glowing amulet from his belt and pressed it against Orion's forehead. Orion screamed a sound that wasn't human or animal. It sounded like tearing metal. The amulet pulsed. A beam of violet light shot from Orion into the sky, piercing the clouds. The ground began to split open. "The red door opens." Kalen laughed maniacally. Joe screamed, charging forward with the misfits. "Get him! Don't let him finish the ritual." But it was too late. A shockwave of energy blasted outward, knocking everyone flat. When the dust settled, Kalen was gone. Orion was gone. And Silas lay motionless on the stones, his heart beating a slow, fading rhythm. Joe crawled over to him, her tears falling onto his face. "Silas. Silas, wake up." Dr. Emily Thorne, clutching her broken arm, rushed over. She checked his pulse. Her face went pale. "It's not just wolfsbane," she whispered, terrified. "The dart. It was tipped with shade venom. It attacks the soul, not the body." "Fix him!" Joe screamed. "I can't," Emily sobbed. "There is no antidote. He has maybe an hour." Joe looked at the sky where the violet beam had faded. She looked at her dying mate. She looked at the misfits who were gathering around, whining softly. "There is one way," a small voice said. Joe turned. It was Echo, the blind wolf. "The golden wolf," Echo said, her unseeing eyes fixed on the horizon. "Orion told me before they took him. He said if this happened, you have to go to the source." "The source?" Joe asked. "The birthplace of the golden wolves," Echo whispered. "The sunken city in the north, but Kalen has taken him there. He's going to use Orion to unlock the power of the ancients." Joe stood up. She wiped the tears from her face. The grief was still there, but it was being hushed down by a cold, hard resolve. "Liam," she commanded. The Gamma stepped forward, looking broken. "Luna, load the transport, gather the misfits, and put Silas in a stasis pod." "Luna," Liam warned, "the sunken city is a myth, and Kalen has an army." Joe looked down at Silas's still form. She bent down and kissed his forehead. "Then we're going to need a bigger army," she said. She turned to the misfits. "Barnaby Tank Echo, you're with me. We're not just going to save the king. We're going to take back our son." She looked at the horizon where the sun was beginning to rise, a blood-red dawn. "This isn't over." The journey to the north was a suicide mission, but Jo Vance had already survived hell once. She wasn't afraid to walk into it again. The transport chopper, piloted by Liam, skimmed low over the frozen wastes of the Arctic Circle. Below them, the landscape shifted from white tundra to jagged black obsidian spires that jutted out of the ice like broken teeth. "There," Echo whispered, strapped into the co-pilot seat. Her blind eyes were moving rapidly. "I can hear the hum. It sounds like a heartbeat under the ice." Ahead of them lay the sunken city. It wasn't a city of steel and glass, but a ruin of ancient stone partially submerged in a frozen lake that glowed with an eerie violet bioluminescence. This was the birthplace of the first wolves, a place forbidden to modern packs, and it was crawling with the Southern Alliance. "They've set up a perimeter around the central ziggurat," Liam yelled over the rotors. "I can't land close. We'll be shot down." "Drop us at the edge," Jo commanded, checking the straps on her tactical vest. She looked at the stasis pod in the back. Silas looked peaceful, suspended in the blue gel, but the monitor showed his life force was at 12%. He was fading. "What about the Alpha?" Liam asked. "Guard him with your life, Liam. Keep the engines running. We're bringing Orion back to him." Jo turned to her misfits. The 12 rejected pups were now battle-hardened teenagers, outfitted in scavenged armor. Tank cracked his knuckles. Barnaby stretched his single leg. Pip the tiny runt was sharpening a knife that looked like a sword in his small hands. "You know the plan," Jo said, her voice steady. "Tank, you're the distraction. Echo, you're the eyes. Barnaby, Pip, you're with me. We infiltrate." "For the Alpha!" Tank roared. "For the Alpha!" the misfits echoed. They jumped. The battle for the sunken city began with a tremor. Tank, dropping from 50 feet, didn't use a parachute. He used his supernatural bone density to turn himself into a meteor. He crashed into the southern barricade, sending ice and soldiers flying. "Ambush!" screamed a southern guard. Gunfire erupted, but the misfits were chaos incarnate. They didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like survivors. The southern wolves, trained in rigid formations, didn't know how to handle a blind wolf who dodged bullets before they were fired, or a three-legged wolf who moved like a pinball. While the chaos reigned at the gate, Jo, Barnaby, and Pip slipped into the shadows of the ruins. They navigated the ancient icy corridors, guided by Echo's voice over their comms. Left at the statue of the Weeping Wolf, Echo directed from her sniper perch on a ridge outside. 3 guards ahead. Heartbeats are slow. They're bored. "Not for long," Jo whispered. They moved like ghosts. They reached the entrance to the central ziggurat, a massive pyramid of black stone pulsating with violet light. Inside, the air was thick with ozone and ancient magic. In the center of the vast chamber, suspended over a pit of swirling energy, was Orion. The golden wolf was screaming. He was chained to a stone altar. Alpha Kalen stood over him, chanting in a language that made Jo's ears bleed. Cables ran from the altar to a massive machine that seemed to be sucking the golden light out of Orion's fur. "He's draining him," Jo gasped. "He's trying to siphon the golden wolf's immortality." "Well," Kalen's voice boomed, stopping his chant. He turned his eyes glowing with stolen power. "The little Luna arrives, and she brought pets." He gestured, and 20 elite guards stepped out from the shadows. "Kill them," Kalen said casually, turning back to Orion. "Pip, go!" Jo shouted. The tiny runt didn't attack the guards. He scrambled up the sheer face of the altar, moving like a spider. He was so small the guards missed him. He made a beeline for the cables. Jo and Barnaby drew their weapons. "Back to back," Jo yelled. The fight was brutal. Jo fought with the ferocity of a woman protecting her family, her silver daggers flashing. Barnaby was a whirlwind of teeth and claws, but there were too many of them. Jo took a heavy blow to the ribs, sending her skidding across the stone floor. She looked up to see Kalen laughing. He placed his hand on Orion's head. "It is done," Kalen roared. "I am the eternal Alpha." A shockwave of golden energy blasted out. The guards were knocked flat. Jo shielded her eyes. When the light faded, Kalen looked different. He was glowing. His muscles had doubled in size. He looked like a god. But Orion was grey. His fur had lost its luster. He hung limp in the chains, his eyes closed. "No," Jo whispered. "Yes," Kalen sneered. He raised a hand, and a bolt of golden lightning shot toward Jo. She braced for death, but the bolt never hit her. A blur of black and silver intercepted the blast. Boom! When the smoke cleared, a figure stood before Jo. It wasn't a wolf. It was a man. Silas. He was pale, wearing the soaked remains of his hospital clothes, dripping with stasis gel. But his eyes were burning with a terrifying crimson fire. "Silas," Jo choked out. "How? Liam?" Silas gritted out his voice, sounding like grinding stones. "He flew the pod, right through the roof." Jo looked up. Sure enough, debris was falling from a hole in the ceiling where the transport chopper hovered. Liam had dropped the Alpha straight into the fight. "You should be dead," Kalen laughed, floating off the ground. "I have the power of the golden wolf. I am invincible." "You stole power," Silas growled, stepping forward, his body trembling with the effort to stay standing. "You didn't earn it. And the golden wolf isn't a battery." Silas looked at the grey, lifeless form of Orion. "Orion!" Silas roared, using his Alpha command. "Wake up! A king does not kneel." On the altar, the grey pup's ear twitched. Pip, who had been hiding behind the machine, saw his chance. He slashed the main conduit cable. Sparks showered the room. The connection between Kalen and the machine was severed. Kalen screamed as the flow of energy reversed. "No, it's mine! Orion!" Silas shouted again. "Call to your pack!" Orion opened his eyes. They weren't violet anymore. They were white, pure, blinding white. The pup threw his head back and howled. It wasn't a sound. It was a vibration that shook the tectonic plates. It was the song of the first wolves. The energy that Kalen had stolen began to rebel. It poured out of Kalen's eyes and mouth, rushing back to its source. "It burns!" Kalen shrieked, clawing at his own skin as he began to disintegrate. The ancient power was too pure for a corrupted soul. He didn't just die. He was erased. The golden energy swirled around the room, a tornado of light. It slammed back into Orion, turning his fur into molten gold. But it didn't stop there. Orion looked at Silas. The Alpha was collapsing, the shade venom finally stopping his heart. Father Orion's voice echoed in the chamber, louder than ever. "Live." Orion leaped from the altar, landing on Silas's chest. The golden light flowed from the pup into the dying king. Jo crawled over, shielding them both with her body, as the ziggurat began to collapse. "I've got you," she whispered, holding on to her husband and the boy who had started it all. "I've got you both." 3 months later. The Obsidian Coast was in bloom. The scars of the siege were covered by scaffolding and new construction. In the garden, laughter rang out. Orion, now nearly full-grown and glowing with a soft, constant light, was chasing Barnaby. Despite his size, Orion was careful, his movements graceful. On the balcony, Silas stood with his arm around Joe. He was fully healed, though a streak of golden hair now ran through his black bangs, a permanent mark of the life force that had saved him. "The Council sent the treaty," Silas said, resting his chin on Joe's head. "The Southern Alliance has surrendered. They want peace." "And the Misfits?" Joe asked, leaning into him. Silas smiled, pointing to the gate. Tank was standing guard, wearing the golden-trimmed armor of the captain of the guard. Echo was beside him, the new head of intelligence. Every single one of the 12 pups Joe had saved was now a high-ranking officer in the pack. "They aren't misfits anymore," Silas said softly. "They are the Golden Guard, the strongest unit in history." He turned Joe to face him. "And you are the Luna who saved the world." Joe smiled, pulling his face down for a kiss. "I didn't want to save the world, Silas. I just wanted to save the puppies." Silas laughed, a deep, rich sound that echoed across the valley. Down in the garden, Orion stopped playing and looked up, his violet eyes twinkling. He let out a happy bark, and the 12 others joined in a chorus of survivors, singing to the moon. They were a strange, broken, beautiful family. And they were home. In the end, Alpha Silas learned that strength isn't about genetic perfection or brute force. It is about the will to survive when the world leaves you to freeze. Joe showed him that love is the most dangerous weapon of all, capable of thawing a frozen heart and toppling tyrants. The 12 pups that were left to die became the saviors of a kingdom, proving that even the broken ones have a purpose. And as the Golden Wolf watches over the Obsidian Coast, the packs know one truth: the Blackwood Pack doesn't leave anyone behind. And that is the saga of the Alpha King and his missing Luna, from a frozen cave of tragedy to the golden throne of victory. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It helps us bring more emotional werewolf sagas to life. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next part of our storytelling adventures. Until next time, keep howling.